the effort for the United States to recognize Kosovo as an independent country in February of 2008. I want to welcome Ambassador Dan Surwer as well, Ambassador Marcy Rees. We have lots of ambassadors, Prime Minister, on this call today. Looking forward to talking to you. And my friend, Mark Guerin. Mark is the director of the Institute of Politics here at Harvard. This event is being sponsored by the Harvard College Albanian Students Association, and its president, Denny Huxa, is here, and we'll introduce the Prime Minister in a moment. It's being sponsored by the Future of Diplomacy Project, the project that I run here at the Kennedy School, and by the Harvard Political Union. We're meeting, Prime Minister, at a time of crisis for Kosovo. We're meeting in a time when the people of Kosovo and the leadership are waiting for the decisions of the Constitutional Court to see how the political situation will evolve. We're also meeting at a time when there's been great controversy over the future of Kosovo. Proposals by some, including perhaps the government in Serbia, for a partition, for land swaps between Serbia and Kosovo. We're meeting at a time that follows many years where the European Union was leading the international effort to try to help stabilize Kosovo and bring it to success. And now we see the intervention of the United States government in the person of Ambassador Rick Grenell as a primary negotiator in this conflict. We'll want to ask the Prime Minister about all these issues. I think most people here know that the Prime Minister has a very long, active, and distinguished involvement in Kosovo politics. He has been Prime Minister for the last several years. He's been a dynamic Prime Minister in many ways in Kosovo, and at a critical time for the people of Kosovo. So with that as introduction, I want to ask Denny Huxa to, and Denny is going to be a senior at Harvard College in the autumn. He's the president of the Albanian Students Association here at Harvard. Denny will introduce the Prime Minister formally. And then following the Prime Minister's remarks, I'm going to moderate the conversation. I look forward to hearing, I know I want to ask Ambassador Wisner to give us some hope and wisdom. I'm going to ask the same of Ambassador Fried and Ambassador Rees, because they always do that. And Prime Minister, we look forward to a very good conversation. Let me just say what an honor it is to have you with us today. Denny, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Burns, for that introduction. We are very honored to have with us here today His Excellency Prime Minister Albin Kurti. The Prime Minister has a long record of public service to the people of Kosovo. He was first active as a student leader of the nonviolent and peaceful protests of 1997 against Serbia's oppression of ethnic Albanians. In 1999, Serbian forces arrested him as a political prisoner with a 15-year sentence. He was released early in 2001 due to international pressure. In June 2005, Kurti and other political activists co-founded Levizja Vetëvendosja, or in English, Movement for Self-Determination. Through Vetëvendosja, he has served 3 terms in office as a member of the Assembly of Kosovo. In the early parliamentary elections held in October 2019, Prime Minister Kurti and his Progressive Party won the most votes. This overwhelming win for Vetëvendosja was groundbreaking and a change from the previous parties in power. Since February 2020, Kurti has been serving as the 4th Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo. As Prime Minister, Kurti has already shaken up the political scene, and his ambitious reforms aim to establish the rule of law, accelerate economic growth, and fight corruption. Kurti also aims to revive the stalled Kosovo-Serbia dialogue on the basis of reciprocity in trade, economy, and politics. Personally, as a student from neighboring Albania, a country which faces many similar internal problems, I am inspired by Prime Minister Kurti's commitment to tackle corruption and his determination to achieve real results that give hope to today's youth. Our organization is deeply honored that he takes his time to talk with us today, this afternoon at Harvard. With that being said, I would like to virtually welcome the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's an honor for me to have this opportunity to make a presentation and discuss with you all. Dear Ambassador and Professor Burns, dear Ambassadors Wisner, Fried, Rees, Server, dear Mr. Hoxha, dear Harvard students and alumni, and in times of virtual meetings and conferences, dear live stream watchers. I would like to start off with a quote from Professor Ukşin, a Kosovar Albanian who in the late 70s was a Fulbright student at Harvard University. No matter how young and inexperienced we are in these processes, we have pledged that we will always move and look forward, that we will be guided by what is progressive in society, and that we will not fall into the trap of political revanchism. Not only because it doesn't get you anywhere, but also because such a phenomenon is reactionary for all societies and at all times. I remember reading Ukşin for the first time decades ago, and this continues to inspire me to this day. When I'm asked how, against all odds, my government and I keep going on, my answer to this springs from the quote above. It never crossed my mind to quit, to give up. It is in the nature of every person, and indeed of every generation, to strive for good and defeat the bad. Ukşin didn't quit either. He was, and still is, a political and intellectual compass to a whole generation of Albanian academics and politically engaged citizens. After his studies in the US, he chose to return to Kosovo. Full of hope and faith and equipped with new knowledge, he wouldn't accept the apartheid regime of the 90s, against whose clutches our liberation efforts were directed at that time. After his last release from prison, where the Serbian regime held him for over 5 years, he was carried out to an unknown place, and to this day, we're still asking for his whereabouts or his remainings. 2 days ago, we marked the 21st anniversary of his disappearance. He remains one of the 1,641 missing persons in the Republic of Kosovo from the war of the last decade of the previous century. One reason why I look forward to have this discussion with you today is because I believe your distinguished university embodies the tradition of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy has been an inspiration for many people, including myself. Like Ukşin, he died too young and because of his convictions and beliefs. JFK was both an idealist and a realist. He was not a pacifist, but neither was he a militarist. He was a president, a reasonable, realistic, and calm president, a historian of excellent understanding of his country and international politics. I'm saying this to underline how difficult it is to pigeonhole a far-sighted, honest politician such as Kennedy into any of the well-known ideological categories, be it liberalism, conservatism, or socialism, or anything else that comes to our mind these days. You should all feel grateful for being students at this university, just as I am thankful for being the Prime Minister of a country that brought up and educated individuals like Ukşin. In some ways, venerable traditions make it easier for us. We can turn to them for guidance in times of difficulty. Yet this privilege also burdens us with responsibilities. Indeed, our time has passed and we're now living in different conditions and a different reality. We have to move forward without contradicting their most cherished ideals, not out of blind deference to them as unquestionable authorities, but because we share the same foundations. I was elected Prime Minister at a time when corruption and unemployment are the two main problems that Kosovo citizens faced, and they are the main factors influencing their decision to leave the country. Right after the elections of the government, on February 3rd this year, without wasting any time, we started with our first anti-corruption and anti-organized crime policies, seeking to put an end to the misuse and loss of public money and to the abuse and extortion of our state. Since the very first workday of our government, we have taken considerable measures for the implementation of good governance, more transparency, as well as the fostering of conditions for economic growth and development. Our most important tasks require a lot of willpower and courage. But as a country, we never lacked human resources or the will of the people to work and build. The governing program of my government is organized around two main priorities, which are mutually interrelated. The first one concerns justice. Above and before everything, this means the ruthless and uncompromising struggle against organized crime and high-level corruption. For example, all of our state-owned enterprises and corporations lose millions of euros due to mismanagement. That's why we have started replacing the boards of directors of these public enterprises with experts on these fields. This struggle is being carried out through the adoption of a new package of laws: the anti-mafia law, the confiscation of illegally obtained properties and wealth, a vetting process in the judiciary to continue with police and intelligence agencies. We have already created a team of legal experts who have laid the groundwork or a thorough transformation of our legal system. The struggle against the economic tycoons who have suffocated the potential for economic growth and development is one of the biggest challenges ahead of us. The second priority is jobs. Therefore, we are having a program with two J's, jobs and justice. So the second priority is jobs. In this area, there is a lot of work to be done, but I believe the most influential thing that would transform our economy is investments from abroad. We have the highest unemployment rate in Europe, but we have also the youngest population in Europe, all of which are fluent in multiple languages. At the same time, Kosovo has a quintessential geographic and cultural central location connecting the entire European continent to the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Northern Africa. As you know, these regions have the highest potential of economic growth. When you combine our anti-corruption effort, you start to see the environment, which is very convenient for progress, the ideal for sustainable development. So jobs and justice are the two main important concerns of mine internally. But as Prime Minister, I'm also determined to lead negotiations with Serbia in order to normalize our bilateral relations as neighbors. So we want normalization of Kosovo as a state and normalization of relations with Serbia. I do have the constitutional mandate, legal right, and political will to carry out this task. The dialogue must resume, but it must be well prepared and based on principles. That is a change from what we have had until now, which was a dialogue without principles. I have proposed a team for the dialogue, which would be led by myself as Prime Minister and would include the Speaker of the Parliament, the President, and one representative from each parliamentary political party, making a team of 10 of us. There are three key principles around which the new dialogue should be organized. First, no agreement without dialogue. Second, no dialogue with maps on the table. And third, no presidents around maps who pretend as if they are army generals in World War I. These principles are of crucial importance, and my government takes them as an undisputable foundation for an agreement with Serbia, whose final result shall be mutual recognition. In the Republic of Kosovo, we are in the midst of a unique historical moment. Many difficult challenges lie ahead of us. It will not be an easy journey. Our firm goal is to succeed and not just to continue to fail better. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "You are not surprised at the force of the storm. You have seen it growing." If I may share a piece of advice with you as young students about to embark on your professional journeys, and as a new generation interested in politics, I have always said that politics is the art of the protection of human dignity. For this, do not underestimate the power lying within you and the storm lying in front of you. Each and every one of you is part of the struggle for human emancipation with all its ups and downs. The political movement from which I come from started with 15 activists who kept this in mind. We were well aware of the storm ahead of us in our country, but we were also confident in ourselves and knew we had the power to tame it. It has now been 15 years since we began making history. So get your 15 together and make history. Don't get caught up in the storm. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for those elegant remarks. We appreciate them very much. We appreciate the messages. I hope the students have heard that last message about change and about dynamic change. I think there'll be a lot of people who want to ask you questions. In a minute, I want to call on Ambassador Wisner, who served with real distinction as the special representative of the Secretary of State for the Kosovo status talks, who worked very hard for the independence of Kosovo and for US recognition of it. I know Ambassador Fried, Ambassador Rees, and Damon Wilson. We were all together, all of us working for the United States government in the spring of 1999, when the United States and NATO intervened to help bring an end to Serb atrocities and to quiet the guns and to allow the people of Kosovo a measure of peace. All of us worked together in 2006, 7, and 8 to see that the United States would recognize Kosovo. And as it asserted its independence, I'm really proud to be with the people on this call today. And I wanted to ask one first question and then ask Ambassador Wisner and the others to ask questions. When we were working with your government and working with the Serb government and members of the Security Council, we in the George W. Bush administration never believed that partition was a practical or a wise solution to the problems of the region. Do you believe partition is the ultimate aim of Serbia and perhaps even the ultimate aim of the current American administration? And if so, what is your argument against it? Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. 3 years ago, President of Serbia started to mention the concept called razgraničenje, delimitation. And within this Serbian word, the root of it is the word border, granica, razgraničenje, delimitation, like putting a new border with Albanians. And it is my conviction that back in 2017, he wanted to ring in the ear with more than a whisper to President Trump, because we know at that time there was very famous this so-called wall that President Trump was about to build with Mexico, and Vučić wanted to resemble that by saying that, okay, I want to also build a wall or a barbed wire for that matter with Albanians. So Albanians and Serbs are separate once and for good. And I think the idea of dividing ethnically in the Balkans is something which actually led to wars. So if somebody proposes partition or these kind of separations on ethnic basis, that is not dialogue of peace and for peace, but that brings us back to the end of 90s when we saw all those massacres and atrocities and genocide. So first of all, it's not a matter of peace. Second is, I believe, racist, because to say that we Serbs want to be on one side of the border and all Albanians on the other side, as if Albanians and Serbs are different species, they cannot live together, it's racist and it's unacceptable. For me as a Democrat, as a social democrat, as somebody who believes in human rights, is unacceptable. And this was possible due to the authoritarian mindset, which is growing these days, where president of the country in the Balkans, be that Serbia, Kosovo, or some other countries in our neighborhood, behave as if they are monarchs in medieval times, where territory of the state is land of the father. State is the house of the father. People are the family of the father. So this patriarchal mindset where fathers of nations can engage in land swaps, in territorial exchange, as if that's private property of their own. So it goes against republic, against democracy. And I think you cannot make a bigger mistake than that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let me call now on my good friend, Ambassador Frank Wisner.
Nick, thank you very much. Prime Minister, what a treat it is to see you again, and thank you for the privilege of being able to talk to you today. I wanted to follow the point that you just made and that Nick set the stage for, and that's your dialogue with Serbia. In your opening remarks, you noted as your third point of priority, you want a different relationship with Serbia. And you outlined the structure of a negotiating team. But a team and an objective is not a strategy. So what is the strategy for achieving an outcome with Serbia? I would argue, if you're not going to go down the territorial road, which you have just expressed doubts about, there has to be other ways that you and the Serb government can come together to find that common ground you refer to. Is it economic? Are there economic measures you can take? Are there other ways to normalize relations? In short, what is your strategy, and how do you and Europe, which is a key partner in this, as well as the United States, work together to achieve it?
Thank you, Ambassador Wisner. I think that it is legitimate to discuss about rights of the people and needs of the communities. So for Albanians and Serbs in Kosovo and in Serbia, but not in terms of territorial exchange. It's about jobs, about healthcare, about qualitative education, about how to link education system with labor market, because there's skills gap all over the Balkans. And we need US and EU together on board. I do not have any sympathy for all those Europeans who are anti-American, but I also must say for those Americans who are anti-EU. I believe in the transatlantic, so US and EU should be together. And we need both. They cannot replace each other, and they cannot be replaced by other superpowers. So for our generation, and I hope for the next as well, EU and US together. Because some of the calculations that have been done by some of the leaders are to play in the dispute between, let's say, EU and US. And I think that's unfair and wrong. On the other hand, I think that we need to normalize relations between Kosovo and Serbia. We can talk a lot about economic cooperation, but also we need to normalize the states as such. In order to have normal relations between Kosovo and Serbia, we need normal Serbia and we need normal Kosovo. And I'm afraid that we have not done much in this respect. And we need EU to be much more active. My proposal is, Ambassador Wisner, just like US had a Marshall Plan for Western Europe after Second World War, it is EU which should have a mini Marshall Plan for Western Balkans this time. Because we both need development and protection from Russia. If 75 years ago, Europe, later on becoming EU, needed development, needed reconstruction and defense from Soviet Union. Likewise, now in Western Balkans, we need development, progress, but again, we need protection not only from Russian Federation, but from China as well. So whenever there is a vacuum of US and EU, it is Russian Federation and China trying to jump in. So in a way, I think solution is not difficult, but we should stay on track and not engage in different kind of dangerous adventures which could bring us back to conflicts.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. And I'm happy to bring Ambassador Wisner back into this conversation. I did want to recognize my friend, Ambassador Dan Fried, as well. And for all of you who are participants in this event today, you can write your question under the Q&A box, and I'm going to be calling on people in just a minute from the Q&A box. Or you can go into participants, raise the blue hand button, ask to speak, and we'll allow you to speak, and of course, welcome you to speak and ask your question. But first, Prime Minister Dan Fried, Ambassador Fried, was Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs during the time when the United States recognized, as did so many other countries, Kosovo as a leading figure in that effort. Dan.
Prime Minister, it's a pleasure to see you. I'm glad we did what we did. That is, we in the Bush administration, with help from a lot of Democrats, pushing the EU to jump with us and recognize Kosovo. I wish all of the EU countries had done it. But when we had the choice of whether to push through or wait, we decided to push through. I'm glad we did. So you've half answered the question I was going to ask, which was a follow-up to Frank Wisner's. The theory we had back in 2008 was that the way to solve the conflict between Kosovo and Serbia was to have them both join the European Union with the condition of membership the condition that membership be simultaneous and that it be linked to a complete settlement of all the bilateral differences. That was the theory. It's a good theory. I think it still works, but as we've seen, the EU has a lot on its mind. It's not as confident as it was. I should say, maybe not, the United States isn't either, but the EU is not seemingly in the mode to bring in new members. There's opposition. There are also forces that insist within the EU and in the Commission that are pro-enlargement for the right reasons. In my judgment, Serbia needs to understand that it can have a European future or it can hold on to the past, but it can't have both. And for that to work, Serbia has to have a European future, the real prospect of membership. What's your sense when you speak to the French and the Germans and the Italians as to their willingness to offer this European future to Serbia and simultaneously to Kosovo? What do they think? What's your sense?
Well, thank you very much. I think this is a very crucial question that I'm not sure I can fully answer, but yet I can give some of my impressions. I think that Germany, France, Italy, and others actually understand that all these 6 countries of Western Balkans, which are still not integrated into EU, they will have to enter EU at the same time. Because Greece did nothing to Macedonia what we might do to each other if one country enters before others. Yet they cannot say so, because this is going to discourage Western Balkan countries from a merit-based process towards European membership. So EU has to say that if you work harder, you join faster. They have to say this. But ultimately, I think they know that either these 6 countries will join at the same time or none of them. And there is this tension inside. EU and Western Balkans are very important from each other. You know, I belong to those historians who think that Second World War is over, but not the First World War. So, and it started in Sarajevo, as we know, in 1914. So it is very important to understand that these six countries have to be included into EU, let's say, in 10 to 15 years' time at once. And meanwhile, you cannot explicitly say this. What we need is a sort of initiative inside EU, which is going to come up with a number like 2030 or 2035, in order to serve as a magnet for all the countries and to join EU. On the other hand, EU has to defend Western Balkans together with US from Russian Federation and from China. And I think that this is not being done as it should. 18 million people are altogether in these six countries. Our GDP is less than 40% of Czech Republic. The GDP of Western Balkans is less than 15% of North Rhine-Westphalia. Can you imagine? So 18 million people, six countries. I say to our European friends, bail us out, bring us in. So it's 16 million people only. So why not do it rather fast? And I think it's doable. Germany with Chancellor Merkel is for this. France also is for this, perhaps not with the intensity of Berlin, but is there. Italy likewise. And I think if US would have been pushing in this direction, could have helped a lot. The last thing I want to say is that I remember in the 90s, economy was the most important thing in EU. In the Balkans, it was culture. It was nationalism and history and myths and so on. In the Balkans, now, economy is the most important. People want jobs. Maybe culture has become the most important in EU now. We have switched. But in the Balkans, there is no more fuel for war machinery of any leader who wants to engage in land swap or in new conflicts. That's why whoever comes with this initiative for inclusion of Western Balkans into EU might not have the support of all the leaders, but the support of people for sure will be there.
Prime Minister, thank you. We're now going to alternate some questions from students and participants, and then I want to go back to Damon Wilson and Ambassador Rees. I know Will Schrepferman has a question. Will, do you want to, if Erica will unmute you, do you want to ask that question? And this question about Prime Minister is about the recent change in the American policy towards Kosovo, which seems to diverge from that of the European Union. Will Schrepferman.
Hi, yeah. I'm Will Schrepferman, rising sophomore at the college. And with regards to the recent moves from Ambassador Richard Grenell in Kosovar politics, what do you think is motivating the Trump administration's shift in policy from what was a previous bipartisan United States consensus and also differs from what you're seeing from Germany, France, and other EU countries?
First of all, I think that President Trump, it's my impression that represents the victory of a stream of political concern in US, that if in 20th century the main rival of US used to be Soviet Union, in this century it is China. And when President Trump met President Putin in Helsinki, I remember that resembled to me like President Nixon meeting Mao in Beijing, in the sense that considering that you have to create some links with others, but not with your main adversary. And I'm afraid that that has been used by President Putin, that he met with President Trump in Helsinki, and now some of his ambitions for Eastern Europe can be resurrected. I don't think that President Trump was into this at all. He was very much focused on the rise of China, which for me, it's not unreasonable. But on the other hand, he was not, I think, fully aware how President Putin is going to abuse this in Eastern Europe, namely trying to break EU and strengthen Russian influence in Western Balkans. We had, in the last 3 years, 2 failed coups d'etats organized by President Putin, one in North Macedonia and the other one in Montenegro. They both failed. And now they want third round, either in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Republic of Kosovo. So this is a very important element to understand, that President Putin is trying to use the new space that he thinks he has by the fact that now US is much more preoccupied with the rise of China. Secondly, Ambassador Grenell, a special envoy of President Trump, is doing a lot of pressure for a quick deal between Kosovo and Serbia, for a quick fix, for a snap agreement. So it is my impression that Ambassador Grenell means no harm to Kosovo or Albanians. He just wants to do it fast. And when you want to do something very fast, you don't have much of historical considerations, and also you tend to make more pressure on the weaker side because you want things to be done within weeks or months. And there's a certain rush from the side of Ambassador Grenell, which he sees as a historical chance to produce an agreement without caring much on the content of the agreement or the implementation of it, but rather focusing on the signatures below the text of the agreement. So he wants signatures from Pristina and Belgrade, and that is the main goal. But I am worried for his approach. And I think he wants it to do at the latest in September. That's why there is tension in Kosovo and in our surrounding. I remember in October, he told me that he wants to have agreement by February. And now I hear that he wants to have it by September. It's an electoral year in US. It's an electoral year in Serbia, in North Macedonia, in Croatia, most probably in Kosovo as well. And we should not rush. I am for dialogue with steady principles and well prepared, with US and EU mediating. When US is there, you have mediation. When only EU is there, you have facilitation, because they cannot say that they mediate, because there are 5 non-recognizers. So that's why we need both US and EU. And it is of crucial importance to make clear to all engaged, including Ambassador Grenell, that we also need an agreement, that we also need dialogue. But if we could do something during this year, it doesn't mean that we can do everything. And that is not because of us, Kosovo and Albanians, but because of Serbia, as we know it, since they never really faced their own past. all the crimes in 4 wars that they have launched, they never really faced their own role into those atrocities. And for over 150,000 non-Serbs being killed by Serbian police and army throughout the 90s, you don't have even 150 people behind bars. So I think it will take time, because after assassination of Prime Minister Đinđić in 2003, the old guard of Milosevic and his clique has been back to power. They have perhaps changed to some degree their methods, but that's due to circumstances, not due to the change of their character.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let's go to one more student question before I return to Ambassador Rees and Damon Wilson. Francis Papandili, you are a student and you have a question about tariffs.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Francis. I'm the Vice President of the Albanian Students Association at Harvard. I'm a rising junior. So my question is, on April 1st, you announced that Kosovo would be lifting the 100% tariff on goods from Serbia. And you talk a lot about the idea of reciprocity and basing future trade on this reciprocity. So how has the change you made on April 1st made a difference in Kosovo-Serbia relations? Thank you.
Before April 1st, we lifted 100% tariffs for raw materials coming from Serbia as a sign of goodwill from our side. Since April 1st, we lifted the 100% tariff for all goods from Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we started to implement reciprocity principle regarding trade when it comes to sanitary and phytosanitary and veterinary documents. We will continue with other elements because we think that reciprocity is a healthy, constructive principle of good bilateral and neighborly relations. We are going to continue with this until 15th of June, and then we are going to evaluate what were the benefits and what went wrong. And the import from Serbia is not as big as it used to be. However, we are focusing now on managing this pandemic COVID-19, but also strengthening our own local producers. So we substitute some of the imports and we increase our export. Serbia didn't like reciprocity. Unfortunately, Ambassador Granel came out against reciprocity because he was telling me all of the time that I have to lift 100% tariff. And I did that, but I said that I'm going to replace this with reciprocity principle. And he said, you should drop reciprocity as well. And I said, you know, also President Trump used to say on many occasions that reciprocity is his most favorite word. So reciprocity is something that we cannot abandon without giving up on our integrity, subjectivity, and dignity as a new state. I think now people got accustomed to that, and it's working well. However, there are many other elements of reciprocity that we still did not endorse. For example, university diplomas of those who graduate in Serbia are recognized in Kosovo, but not the other way around. We have many Albanians in Preševa, Bujanovce, and Medveđa who graduate in University of Pristina, but they cannot become teachers and doctors in Valley of Preševa. So together with EU, we hope to fix the remaining issues. We don't see reciprocity as a mean of retaliation, but as a concept which derives from equality as value. We feel discriminated, we want to be equal, and we say reciprocity as principle.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I want to call on Ambassador Marcy Rees. I think, as you know, Prime Minister, Ambassador Rees served as the United States ambassador to Albania, and is a longtime expert on the Balkans. Marcy.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, it's an honor to be with you today and to see you again. You mentioned the youthful quality of the population of Kosovo. It is the most youthful population in Europe. And it's also the case that in a negotiation that you would undertake, that the country will have to accept what is agreed. Is that you were once a student organizer? Is the population interested in these negotiations? Is it still interested in integration into Europe, or have other preoccupations taken over?
Thank you, Ambassador. You again. I hope after we get rid of this pandemic COVID-19, you will all be able to come and visit the region again. We all miss you. Kosovo has a young labor force that can easily adapt to the needs of the market. The average age in our country is 30. Most of the youth speak languages that are most spoken in the European Union. And I can without a doubt say that the most common foreign language that they learn and know is English. 96% of Kosovo households are currently connected to the internet. 81% use internet every day. Our young workforce has the technological capabilities to do complex data analysis and web development, but we need investments for that. In this respect, I would like to emphasize that I'm a strong believer of the dual education system. So the relation between education and employment is not any longer a diachronic one, where you first finish university and then you try to get a job, but has become a synchronic one, hand in hand. So vocational schools, these links between education and economy, where students spend, let's say, 3 to 4 days at schools and 1 to 2 days in factories or in business, in like service industry, etc. So I think this could help us prevent migration of youth. Youth is migrating to EU, mainly Switzerland and Germany and Austria, but also London and Scandinavia. So we need to have them here, but for this purpose, we need to create a bridge between education and employment. Youth are not much interested about relations with Serbia and future negotiations. Of course, recent history is traumatic because everybody has someone in the family who has been killed or missing or beaten by Serbian forces during the 90s. But nonetheless, people want to look forward, and their key concern is jobs in the labor market and justice in society and in institutions. So basically, when we won as a party, we won because we spoke what actually was all of the time in people's minds and hearts, and especially the youth. So people are leaving Western Balkan countries, Kosovo in particular, towards where our diaspora is, where our working class is, mainly Switzerland and Germany. I don't think that they see some other solution except EU. So they see EU and US. But whereas US is on the other side of the Atlantic, they love and like US even more than Europe. But Europe is our continent. So I think both in this sense are very much needed, and people are thankful to both. We want to join EU, but at the same time, we know that without NATO, we lose our peace and security, and there can be no NATO without US. So people are very much aware of this, and I think that they look towards the West, and they see no other solution for themselves besides the West, namely EU and US.
Prime Minister, thank you. I want to call on another student. Humza Jilani is going to be a rising junior at Harvard College. And Humza, I know you have a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for being here and chatting with us, Prime Minister. My question is about sort of Kosovo's broader religious identity as a largely secular state with a Muslim majority, and how that kind of impacts its engagement with the EU. And we're seeing sort of a far-right shift where kind of the idea of an Islamic presence in the EU, regardless of how secular it might be, is kind of turned off to a lot of different, more far right-wing actors in body. So how has Kosovo maybe downplayed or played up its identity when interacting and negotiating with the EU? And how has perhaps its religious identity influenced those negotiations?
There are prejudices when it comes to Kosovo, but these are located among right-wing extremists who, even when they know the truth, they continue to say lies because they use what can be utilized for their unquestionable truths. Kosovo is a secular state and society. Albanians in general, they have 3-4 religions, and we always had with each other more than tolerance. We had coexistence and cooperation. Our imams and our priests, they are together on so many public events and different kind of non-religious occasions. It might have been used by right-wing extremists, but I think that we are such a secular state and society that they couldn't really lie anyone else besides the fact that they cannot lie themselves. You know, it's everybody knows that Kosovo is a parliamentarian democratic republic without specific religious identity.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I want to call on Emmett Halm. Emmett is a undergraduate at Harvard College. He has a question on NATO. Emmett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Emmett Halm. I'm an undergraduate at the college. My question is, at a time when U.S. foreign policy is becoming more insular, questioning the importance of NATO and other international institutions, what would you say to the next generation of U.S. foreign policy leaders here at Harvard in regards to the Western Balkans? Thank you.
EU as a project has 3 main pillars, I believe. First is peace with and through anti-fascism. Robert Schuman on 9th of May 1950 made his famous declaration on the 5th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, launching the project of EU as project of peace. And that was done in contrast to Munich Conference 1938, namely former British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and Peace at Our Times, which basically showed that if you make peace with fascism, you get a world war. And if you make peace through anti-fascism, you can launch a project like EU. This is the first pillar. Second is continental European welfare state. It's very important to combine economic growth with social justice. And third one is NATO security umbrella. So without NATO, you lose EU as well. And if we lose EU, the winner is Russian Federation. Nobody in US can win if we lose EU. Both EU and US will lose and Russian Federation will win. In order to preserve EU, we need to preserve all its three pillars, in particular this third pillar, NATO security umbrella, where at the essence of it is the United States of America. And also we, people of Kosovo, know best how important is NATO. Without NATO intervention, and later on without Declaration of Independence, which was first and foremost supported by United States, we wouldn't be a free country today. So US, NATO, EU find their truthful functionality precisely in the independent and sovereign state of Kosovo. And this is a kind of an indication for entire region of the Balkans, and I dare to say for the entire continent as well.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I think we have time for one more question from a student. And I want to call on the Secretary of the Albanian Student Association, Drin Krasniki, who is a member of the Harvard College class of 2022. Drin, please.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for finding the time to have this conversation with us today. I'm Drin Krasniki, rising junior at Harvard, coming from Peja. I wanted to ask whether your government has any plans on providing incentives for the youth of Kosovo to study internationally and/or return to Kosovo after graduation. Thank you.
Yes, we want to connect with our diaspora, not only with the working class, but in particular with students and professors that we have there. And we had a lot of brain drain in these 2 decades or 3 decades, and we now need brain gain. And we would like to launch in the near future this project where for 6 months or 1 year, students from Kosovo who study in United States could come back and do internship in state institutions, in publicly owned enterprises, in different independent agencies, and at the same time perhaps write their dissertations, like master degrees, and then at the same time contributing to our democratic state building, because civil servants, public administration, we need some work organized around American and European ethics, Western ethics. And we believe that for the organization of the state, this is indispensable.
Prime Minister, thank you. I know that you're busy. You have a lot to do. We'll have to conclude the proceedings, but I wanted to thank the Albanian Students Association and Dani Hoxha in particular. I wanted to thank the Harvard Political Union, the Future Diplomacy Project. I wanted to thank my distinguished former colleagues in the United States government, Ambassador Wisner, Ambassador Fried, Ambassador Rees, and I hope in the future, Ambassador Damon Wilson. And Prime Minister, I want to conclude on this note. You noted, I think, quite correctly that the United States is now focused first and foremost on China and the strategic problem of China. I think that's true, but we're still focused very much on Europe. Europe remains, and Damon knows this from his brilliant association, well, Damon's the vice president of the Atlantic Council, that the European Union is the largest trade partner with the United States, that the European Union is the largest investor into our economy, and the greatest number of American allies in the world are the NATO allies of Europe and of Canada. We're still focused on Europe. We believe in a Europe that's whole and free and at peace. That was the vision of George H.W. Bush and Helmut Kohl and Francois Mitterrand and Margaret Thatcher 30 years ago. We want to work in concert with the EU. We Americans believe that the European Union is our great partner, not a foe and not a competitor of the United States. And we want to see a future Kosovo that is a member of the United Nations, that is recognized by all countries in the world, that has secure borders, that has not been forced to trade its territory for short-term political gain, that is truly independent and truly at peace. That is a vision that a lot of us feel is important for the future of your country. And we want to thank you for devoting some time to educate us today and help us understand the complexities of your country. And I'll leave the final word to you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Burns. I'm utterly grateful and thankful for your role, for your personal role, and all the other ambassadors that honored me with their participation in liberation and independence of Kosovo. It was an honor and pleasure for me to speak to and with you today. I'm glad and touched that the Harvard Albanian Students Association reached out to us. The US has taught you so much, and Kosovo has so much to offer you. I cannot wait to welcome all of you here in Kosovo. The government of Kosovo is always willing to cooperate with students, professors, and alumni from Harvard. I personally invite you all to reach out to us with questions, thoughts, and ideas through Deni Hoja, your local student contact. My door is open for you. Don't come knocking.
Well, Prime Minister, perhaps in the post-coronavirus world, we'll come walking through your door, all of us, to support a free and independent and peaceful Kosovo. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Looking forward. Thank you very much.
And thanks to everyone for joining us. We appreciate it.